Okay, sorry about the robot voice there. Okay, so welcome everyone. My name's Toby Lloyd. I, with Andy Abbott, who's also on the call, are the co-founders of UBI Lab Arts. The lab started in, I think, 2020, in August of the time, just a little bit into the pandemic. And we were, kind of, both Andy and I are artists. We've been interested in basic income for a long time and both made projects which sort of used creative methods to deepen and broaden the conversation about basic income, usually introducing it to people and starting conversations, particularly in ways which hopefully can circumnavigate some ideological barriers which may come in sort of more political forums. We started the lab as a way of sort of addressing concerns which artists, musicians, anyone creative might sort of have around basic income. I know there's lots of people who have their reservations, and also, sort of to bring it into the discussions of how it would enable more people to be creative. But we opened the lab and we wanted to address how artists and all creative people would benefit from it, but also to include arts workers, anyone working in the creative fields or creative industry. So, including people who might be front of house in a theatre, for example, acknowledging that they might also have a creative practice, which that job actually funds their creative practice or, enables them to try and do that. And, acknowledging that many of us who are artists live quite precarious lives and that basic income could benefit in a very positive way. But we also decided that we didn't want this to be sort of a propaganda machine for the wider UBI Lab network. And that, we thought these creative sessions would be a good way of introducing other artists and creative people working in sort of this kind of field and sharing ideas and other projects which they might have come across. I'll just give you a quick sort of brief overview of the UBI Lab network. The first lab was in Sheffield. I think they started in 2017 or 18, and they opened up, sort of allowed other people to sort of franchise the brand, so we could create labs all over, well, all over the world eventually, potentially. But at the time, it was just a few labs in the north of England. But when the pandemic started, interest in basic income expanded, and so did the lab. So Andy and I started UBI Lab Arts in, like I said, in August 2020. But there's labs in the US now, in Jakarta. So spreading in lots of different places, but all over the world. But they've also got several different labs which represent sort of particular identities or different groups. So there's a UBI Lab Women, UBI Lab Disability, UBI Lab LGBTQ+. Sorry, excuse my, it's not the best public speaker. But yeah, the idea is that different members can join and sort of share resources and also focus in particular fields which might not be addressed by a wider movement, but also to sort of figure out the best ways of doing things ourselves and then sharing that with the wider group. Hopefully that all makes sense. I think I'll stop rambling now and hand over to Andy to sort of introduce tonight's session.
Thanks, Toby. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming along. I think Toby has very nicely introduced the session there, said what UBI Lab Arts is about. So yeah, this is just we're calling them creative practice sharing sessions. They're really a way of us creating an archive of different approaches that artists and art workers are using to broaden and deepen the discussion about universal basic income. And I'm really happy that we're joined by Kendall and Chloe to talk about the basic income kind of youth network, and Rona to talk about her journey as well. So it'll be about sort of 10-15 minute presentation from Chloe and Kendall and a 10-minute presentation for Rona. We'll have a little break in between for sort of questions as well. And so I think unless there's any questions from anyone before we begin. if you want, just sort of, raise your hand, or you can use the chat box if there's anything that you need to know from us. But otherwise, I'll just pass on to Kendall and Chloe.
Awesome, thank you.
Great. Let's get us started. Are you sharing, Kendall?
There we go. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Awesome.
Incredible. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming, and we're super excited to have received this invitation to chat a little bit more about a project that means a lot to Kendall and I.
Sorry, I'm really struggling to hear you. I'm reading the captions and you're going too fast ahead of the captions. Your volume is quite low. Can you please speak louder and slower, as I'm hard of hearing in both ears? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I can definitely speak slower and try to speak louder, although I have a partner working in our 1-bedroom apartment, but we'll speak as loudly as I can. So my name is Chloe. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joined by Kendall, who we are both the co-founders and co-chairs of the Basic Income Canada Youth Network. And we are a grassroots volunteer network of young people, a generous definition of youth under 35 across Canada, who are advocating for basic income. And we do lots of different work kind of around education and community building, and activism are the sort of pillars that we work around. But we're here today to talk a little bit about one specific project that really jumped off last summer and is kind of closed off for now, but I think we're hoping to pick it back up because we see a lot of potential and have a lot of excitement about it. But that project is called Basic Income Bought Me, with the goal of really being to mobilize some research around basic income using social media. I would not consider myself an artist. I'm not sure if Kendall would either. We're both primarily, outside of basic income space researchers. And I think we're really excited about the idea of how can we get some of the evidence, some of the research around basic income out into the world in a creative way. So I think exactly what you said, Toby, using creative methods to get some of this out there was really one of the things that sort of inspired this project. So yeah, we'll walk you through it and love to chat more in the questions after.
Okay. It doesn't matter how many times I do screen sharing or yeah, we're almost starting year 3 of the pandemic. I still takes me a minute to figure out where all the buttons are. So before we jump into talking about what we did with this project, we would love to hear from the folks who are here. If you had a basic income, what you might spend it on. We started this project, the kind of catalyst for this project is that, as Chloe mentioned, again, both of us are researchers and have worked on projects examining the prematurely canceled basic income pilot from the province of Ontario, where both of us live. And despite the fact that both Chloe and I were really quite sold on the concept of basic income, reading the interviews with folks who had actually been part of the pilot and received money was very impactful for us, and something that some of the parts that really stood out were hearing the stories of how people spent their money and the impact that those purchases had on their lives in the short term and the longer term. So we're really asking the whole theme of this project that we did is around what people spent their money on. And so as we're going through this, if you want to share with us some of the things you think you might spend a basic income on, we'd love to hear about that. I went the wrong way. There we go.
Yeah, so kind of going off of what Kendall was just saying, I think as in other places in the world over the past 2 years, interest in basic income in Canada has really grown. The federal government put out a benefit, a cash transfer benefit towards the beginning of the pandemic that in particular made people really excited about the idea of a basic income because it was a decent amount of money with some conditions attached to it, but many people were really drawing the connections between those two things. And as sort of interest in that idea, grew again, we were seeing kind of some of the same questions around, will a basic income make people lazy, and all of the things that I think as advocates we're like, we don't really want to answer these questions anymore. But yeah, like Kendall said, I think one of the questions that had been coming up is well, what would people spend a basic income on? And I think there's the question there of like, are people going to spend it on things that we quote unquote don't want them to spend it on, things like alcohol, things like drugs, things like whatever, the things that society deems inappropriate, which is a whole other set of questions, I think. But is there a positive side to that story as well? Like, in addition to talking about what people aren't buying, what are people spending the money on? Like, what is the potential for that money? So as Kendall mentioned, both of us had been involved with separate projects about the Ontario Basic Income Pilot, which, as mentioned, was a pilot project that was run in 3 cities/towns across the province of Ontario, and ended. The final payments were distributed in early 2019. It wasn't a universal basic income. It was administered as a negative income tax, more of a basic income guarantee style. And yeah, was prematurely canceled. There had been an evaluation planned around it that did not go forward because the government also didn't see value in that, apparently. But I did my master's research on the Ontario Basic Income Pilot right when it was kind of being canceled, actually at Cambridge in the UK, which so I'm happy to be with a UK group again. And Kendall had been involved in a project with some researchers out of Carleton University and McMaster University that collected both quantitative and qualitative data from pilot participants. And I had kind of wrapped up my work a while before, and Kendall had been in the middle of coding interviews and sending me texts saying, wow, this person said that they bought this, and like, I can't believe reading this quote, like, what an incredible story. If only the people that are asking these questions could see these quotes. And kind of doing some back and forth, we were like, well, why couldn't they see these quotes? Like, why couldn't we, we share exactly how people are spending a basic income, and just put that out into the world. So that's kind of what launched this idea. The project was a collaboration between our group, the Basic Income Canada Youth Network, sort of the researchers involved in these 2 different projects, and the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction, which is a small anti-poverty charity based in the city where one of the pilot sites, and they've been really involved in basic income advocacy since the pilot was canceled. So that was kind of where it came from.
Okay, and I'll be brief on this because we want to share some of the examples, of course, of what we did and the response that we received from it. But so really what we were hoping to do with the project is to get this research out into the world, using social media to talk about basic income as a desirable policy option, to have the voices of people who actually have experience with basic income, again, be out into the world, and to challenge some of those beliefs about poverty, basic income, and welfare that Chloe was talking to, alluding to before, around concerns of what people would spend the money on. So the quotes that we pulled are from 68 interviews with pilot participants. We started by pulling 257 quotes about how people spent their money, and then narrowed it down into 9 weeks of content. I think we had, what was it, almost 40 unique posts, and we turned all of the quotes into very shareable and colorful kind of graphics, which again we'll show you shortly here.
And I'll also do
this, or do we? Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. I'll go click on.
Oh, there you go. Sorry.
I'll go quick on this because I think some of this is more of the details of how we did it. But I think two things that we did want to highlight here. The first was just that I think we were conscious of a couple of things going into this. One, that there had been some really horrible media coverage when the pilot was happening around exactly this question of how people were spending their money. And we wanted to be really intentional and really careful about how we were sharing these stories to avoid people who had been on the pilot, getting that backlash again over 2 years later. As well as like making sure that we're kind of not just filling into the narratives of people are spending money in the socially acceptable way and trying to push back against that a little bit. So just to say that we did consult with former folks who had formerly been part of the pilot to kind of feel how this was landing with them, what their concerns were, sharing some of the more kind of quote unquote controversial things that we were hoping to share, which were really valuable discussions to have. And we also went through a process where, we knew that because we were sharing this primarily on Instagram, our main target was kind of, the 30 and under crowd, and did some kind of pilot testing with some friends about our potential quotes and saying, which of these land with you, which of these don't. And a lot of the result of that was, I love this quote, but I'm worried about how somebody else is going to, take it. And a lot of people were very concerned, I think, about the reactions that we might get because we dared to say that people living in poverty deserved to have nice things. So it was a really interesting and a really valuable process, but I'll leave it there and then we can get on to the actual examples.
Okay, so this is an example of one of the posts from the campaign. So the square shape is what we posted on Instagram, and then we resized everything for Twitter and Facebook as well. The first slide, it says basic income bought me nutritious food. And then you can see we pulled different graphics for all of the first slides. We have a communications person on our communication specialist on our board who helped us with planning out all of the color schemes and that kind of good stuff. And so all the posts look really cool, actually, like one next to the other. But so this quote says, I've been able to spend more on healthy foods and eating more often. So I'm no longer missing a meal. I'm always getting all my meals, getting my nutrition and being able to afford the right nutritional stuff, not just garbage, but actually buying wholesome meals. And then at the bottom here, we included a quote, a comment that somebody posted on when we posted this particular graphic, something that somebody responded to us. And so it says basic income provides access to basic needs. Meeting nutrition needs should not be a luxury of some. Everyone deserves food security. If you still believe basic income is a handout that will be wasted, you need to ask yourself what kind of stereotypes about marginalized people are fueling those beliefs. And so this is just an example. Again, it was really cool to see the commentary and response that came back when we were sharing these things. Food security is not particularly controversial. I think, we weren't expecting backlash of folks saying, oh, I can't believe that pilot participants spend their money on food. That was not something we were expecting, but and not something we heard, of course, but it was really neat to not just see the lack of negative response from when we shared these quotes, but the really kind of meaningful things that people commented as well.
It's also funny because Kendall's mentioning Hannah, who did a lot of the graphic design work for this. And I regularly look back to the first mock-up that I sent Kendall when we were like, what if we did this? It's so ugly. Thank goodness we had someone with some basic understanding of color theory. So this is another one where basic income bought me freedom from debt. I owed money to Ontario Works, which welfare program here, because they overpaid me. So I paid that off in about 5 months. And I remember I paid off my last $50. And the lady at the counter says to me, "You are lucky." She says, "You are free." And I said, "I am free. 13 years on social assistance, I felt free for the first time.
Chloe, do you want to read this next one because it's your favorite?
It is my favorite, yeah. So this was one where I think was one where it was teetering towards potentially more controversial, and I actually think it's worth saying that the backlash we anticipated did not come really at all, actually, which we were really pleased about. But this one is basic income bought me lunch for a friend. I was able to take my friends for lunch. Nothing extravagant, still living on a budget, going to a $5.99 all-day breakfast and saying, thank you for being my friend. And thank you up to now for always paying for lunch. I can buy you lunch. I can say thank you to the friends who have invested in me and my friendship years ago. I could take them out for tea and coffee and say, thank you for doing that. I will never forget that.
And Chloe, maybe I'll jump to the results and last slide, if that, does that make the most sense? And just in the interest of time.
Sure.
Okay. So we have lots more. There's a lot of quotes. We'll put our links to
Wait,
the
do you want to share the cashew one?
Yeah, sure. Okay. This was my favorite. So this one's basic income bought me cashews, and the quote says, my son asked for them and I could say, yes, we can buy cashews. I'll spend $25 on nuts. It was nice to have that freedom to be able to say yes without sacrificing 5 boxes of cereal. The first thing we did when we got the basic income was go out and buy cashews because my son loves cashews. So that was a big thing. They're like $25. And one of the comments we received on this post was, this literally made me stop and think of all the frivolous things I buy and how if someone hasn't been able to have a treat yourself moment, how special that is. This one was I loved this one because, you know, I think if you can afford to buy cashews and not stop and think about it, think twice. I think this one is really, really impactful. Just thinking about how much the freedom of choice that comes with consistent income security. Okay, back to you then.
Sorry, I was like, well, we talked about controversy. That was the one that when we did the pilot testing, people were like, I think this is great, but are you sure? And we were like, we're including cashews. We love the cashews. We were pretty firm about that one. So just in terms of what kind of came out of this, this is a not great screenshot from a wrap-up event that we hosted around the campaign. And this is from a documentary that was screened alongside it. So social media reach was huge for us and in the tens of thousands, and especially because we're still kind of getting off the ground social media wise, we were really, really pleased with this. In August alone, the Instagram posts reached over 15,000 people, and we did share as well across Twitter and Facebook. Posts were shared widely and by some folks that we were really excited about. It had some uptake by members of parliament and senators and research folks and nonprofits, professional associations, media. We did get some media coverage. I think we always would have loved more, but we also did recognize the challenges of pitching a social media campaign, which I think we're thinking about moving forward. And one thing that was really exciting for us was that it was shared with the Parliament of Canada's All-Party Anti-Poverty Caucus, which is a kind of like a working group within federal government around anti-poverty, and one of their members picked it up and shared it back with them. So the campaign wrapped up technically in September, and we're really keen to do more with it. And a lot of the ideas that we've been thinking about moving forward are really exploring like what can we do with this that is more arts-based. We've talked about having like, is there a way to work with art galleries and put this out like on walls, or work with artists to have some of this this information displayed differently, and definitely have been constrained by COVID. But I do think that part of the reason why we are excited to come here today was to see if anyone here had any ideas or suggestions of how we might move forward. So just putting that out there for when we get to discussion.
And that's it from us. We'll share our website in the chat. And again, we would really encourage you to check out the full campaign on social media. It looks really cool. Again, like when it's all kind of all strung together. But yeah, I'll wrap it up here. Thank you for listening and letting us share about this with you.
Thank you, Kendall. Thank you, Chloe. Fantastic presentation. Really kind of like a clear and direct kind of project, and very sort of beautifully presented in terms of the actual content, but also the kind of clarity of the sort of thinking that it brings around basic income, and this move towards humanizing it so quickly with things, the anecdotes about things like nuts or a lunch, I think is really something that we've talked about a lot in terms of how, as artists or art workers or people that might use creative methods, we can sort of move beyond the sort of usual discussion about basic income, which tends to be very focused on economics, and to sort of to give it some soul and give it some sort of humanity, I think is really something that's coming out really strongly in your project. So thanks very much for sharing it so well as well. Is there anyone that would like to sort of ask a question or make a comment? Maybe.
I mean, I guess, just to echo what Andy said, but I think, when I saw the presentation, when you presented at the Basic Income Earth Network conference, I thought, I mean, it's very similar, obviously there's the slide of the Jesse Golem's like Humans of Basic Income project, which I thought, was also excellent, but I felt that, what you've been able to do is just like really, really sharp and short, and really it really hits home, particularly that the one about buying people lunch and saying thank you for being a friend and investing in them, and that always, I tear up a little bit every time I hear that, because it's, but it is such a, it does humanize the whole thing and helps it get past that, like, how would other people do it, because it's that whole thing, isn't it, when you speak to people, everyone else would waste the money, but I would be responsible with it or use it on usual things. And so the kind of the projects which I've worked on as well have always tried to center the person you're talking to at the heart of it, like, how would it affect your life, and then you can kind of build up from that. And I think this does that really, really well, and especially the breadth of example you've got there. And I think personally, I find those just short anecdotes much more effective, and even just as little hooks to get people more interested in basic income than any article or report which says, like, on a broad sweep about how it reduces hospital visits, how it improves mental health, confidence, all these kinds of things. That's all well and good, and it is all true, and it all makes is very, very compelling, at least from my point of view. But I think these just these very short sound bites just cut straight through that, and it doesn't have to be the poverty kind of thing about like, we could afford nuts or whatever, the things like I think like the gym and paying off debt and all that kind of stuff. And I guess to respond to your sort of thing, if I had a basic income, it would mean that I could spend more time with friends and family. It would mean that I could, I wouldn't have to work as much, which would be, I know that wouldn't be maybe as convincing as some of the arguments that you've got in there for some people, but it would be important. But I'll leave it at that. Rona, do you want to go next?
I was struggling to hear Chloe towards the end of the presentation. You said something about it. Does anyone have any ideas of how to do this, to do something or other to do with COVID? And I didn't quite understand or get what you were saying about what ideas you were looking for with regard to COVID. So if you could please repeat that, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I talk fast normally, and then I get nervous or excited, and just it keeps going faster. What I was trying to say was that we had a lot of ideas of how to kind of scale or expand this. And maybe, for instance, is there a way to move it into art galleries or work with artists? And just to say that a lot of that kind of more in-person, hands-on stuff has been more difficult given COVID, and the fact that many people on our team are located in different places, but mostly COVID. So you know, it was kind of a two-part, saying that those were some ideas that we've had that have been a little bit difficult to realize, but also if folks have ideas of where this can move next, also knowing that we have literally hundreds of more quotes that we could be sharing, we would be super open to them. And thank you so much for those reflections, Toby. You, I think, kind of are in our brains with everything you just said there.
And if I could maybe just say, sorry, just to respond to one thing, Toby, around the like having the short quotes and kind of getting people hooked. It was really interesting for us when we had I think we had narrowed it down to maybe, what, 50 quotes. And when we were, again, kind of testing things out with friends and family and trying to figure out what would resonate and which things to anticipate some more controversy around. It was really interesting because, again, folks would respond and say, you know, I think this post about being able to buy a steak dinner or whatever is really good, and that was impactful for me. But I'm so worried about what that might, like, how people who are anti-basic income, how they're going to take this and kind of run with it. And so we had to have a lot of conversations. Or we did have a lot of conversations, Chloe and I, about who it was that we're seeking to reach with the campaign. And, you know, we agreed that the project is not going to be compelling for folks who, you know, hate poor people or are really, you know, have some deeply ingrained, again, ideological issues with basic income. But more so for folks who, you know, maybe just don't think about it or don't think about poverty very much, who haven't considered that there are alternative policy responses than to addressing poverty than what we are doing right now. And so that really helped, I think, for us to think about how we wanted to frame and what we wanted to do, which quotes we wanted to share, to remind ourselves that we're not seeking to you know, change anybody's fundamental beliefs with it, but really it was to hook people in and to get people thinking about basic income who maybe just aren't thinking about it already.
Thanks, Kendall. I was also going to make an observation just related to sort of, yeah, what has come up in previous UBI discussions, which is this, yeah, the conversation seems to always be backwards, is that if I was offered a universal basic income, then of course I would spend it really, really well. But if it was to someone else, it wouldn't. And it seems that, yeah, you had a similar feeling with putting these things out, that of course I would respond really well to this social media post, but some other people might not. And actually taking that leap of faith and sort of seeing how you, again, like how you humanized it, and the presentation is kind of, considering it's just words and it's just text, I think, yeah, to be able to sort of really pull the ones that have the humanity in them works really well. I'm kind of interested in the fact that they're anonymized, aren't they? There isn't a name or an age or anything, which is kind of, again, I wonder, you know, it's just a thought whether that makes it easier to empathize with or more difficult, or sort of how, you know, it's this sort of, it's an interesting idea. And then also in this invitation that you're sort of making around the idea that, you know, perhaps this material could be worked with more, or other people could take it into other areas. Under what conditions you might sort of feel that wouldn't cause an ethical dilemma? Because as you say, it's kind of, you've put a lot of thought and care into sharing those stories, but in the wrong hands, or kind of like with less care, it could kind of be used as in a way that kind of, yeah, prompts or sort of substantiates, yeah, sort of positions that you're not really so into. So I wonder kind of whether how comfortable you'd feel just sort of making it open to artists to work with as material, and whether you would feel that you'd have to put any conditions around that, or yeah, how that could work.
I can start, and then Kendall will probably have more, right. And I first just wanted the piece that you touched on around the, I would do this, but other people wouldn't. Maybe a little less related to this project, this specific project, but when I was interviewing people, that came up with participants again and again, people. And, I think that the reason, and this is, not the world that I want to live in, but I think the reason that some of the stories came out that did is because people were really keen to justify, and you can tell in an interview when someone, and people would defend their decisions a lot, and people would say, I went to a concert, but I never get to go, and I really love music, and it was my birthday, and like I had to tell people, I don't care. I love that you got to go to a concert. Or people saying, I heard about other people doing this, but I did this. And I think like just obviously the divisiveness of that, and again, really wanting to be able to present these things in a pretty neutral, like, you deserve to spend your money in the way that you want to spend your money. And that's what we're getting at here, not like, creating some hierarchy of basic income purchases. In terms of the anonymization and use of it, I think that's interesting. Both only Kendall and I have access to our own transcripts and data. Like nobody else on our team has seen that either, until they were like pretty anonymized and we had narrowed them down a little bit more. And that's just because both of these projects have gone through university research ethics boards. So, I mean, I do think that the stuff that's out there in the world already, it's a little bit out of our control to some extent, how people use it. And, I think people could pick some of those things up and use them in a way that wouldn't be entirely aligned with, what we might be wanting to do with it. But I don't know, I think we'd be open to having conversations about, working in partnership, but probably not handing over just like data, of course. Kendall?
Yeah, I was just going to say too that part of the thought around having the quotes be kind of as anonymized as they are, so not even having, like you said, a pseudonym, or this is a 40-year-old woman, or this person is from this like having no identifying information tied to it, but was also, again, not just because we had to, but was a kind of extra ethical decision that we took, because when we consulted with former pilot participants at the start of this, or like prior to the campaign actually starting, like there were really, really significant concerns about community and media backlash. And that was because when participants spoke up in the media when the cancellation happened, like there were full op-eds written just villainizing participants, right, and naming them and talking about what the decisions that they made. And it is really quite horrific. And so the participants were very concerned about what would happen if people knew that they were the ones that purchased the things they did, again, especially with some of the things we shared that were a little more controversial, although they shouldn't be. And so we saw it more so as something that, like, if there was no identifying information, again, participants, I think, felt better about that. But then it comes back to us, and we're the ones who respond and say, it puts a little bit of a distance and a bit of a bubble, like some protective barrier there, I think. And then, I mean, so the original, like when we were first kind of thinking about this project, but I think the first thing that I had pitched to Chloe was that it would be really cool to do like a collage that had, we took all of the quotes about, like, all of the data about how people spent their money, and then made a collage that was representative of, like, people talked about food security a lot. And so finding images of all of the different specific foods that people purchased and having them and doing kind of something like that. And so some of the things that we have talked about then about where we might go next with this is, putting some parameters around saying, this is what the project is. These are our guiding values and principles. This is what we have sought to do with it, and saying, like, putting it out and saying, you know, based on this quote about buying lunch with a friend, like, write us a song, give us a paint us a picture, like doing some of whatever, however, what kind of medium it would be. You know, our network has no money. We're all volunteers. We have no funding, and we don't feel like that's a project we would move forward with without being able to pay people for the works that they create. But just to give a kind of sense of what some of the things we've been thinking about and how we might, I think I think we probably would put some pretty clear parameters around what we were hoping to do, but but hard to know how that would actually play out.
That's great, Kendall, thank you. I'm just kind of conscious of time, and it'd be nice to sort of just keep things moving along. Maybe we can come back to some of these things at the end as well. But yeah, really great, and yeah, very sort of, again, provocative kind of discussion that it's bringing up already, and the invitation to sort of work with some of that material, super, yeah, really generous, and I'm sure something that we'll come back to.